Hi folks, my name is Mike Dobbs and I'm your host for another edition of Government Matters here on Focus Springfield. We have as our guest the guy I really want to talk to right now, and that's Congressman Richard Neal, because so much is happening so quickly. I'm sitting at my desk, I'm working on book number 9 right now, and I get notifications from the Hill. And so if I'm sitting there writing or doing notification, the Hill. So much is happening at a pace it's hard to keep up with. And I thank you for coming on today.
It's a strategy.
To have all that going on, is that to confuse people or
It is.
to say don't look here, look here?
It's to change the subject.
Okay.
And I think that I'm not arguing for 1 second that it's successful, but let's put it this way. In terms of changing the subject, much of it's effective.
So I want to just start out, what's happening that you in Washington right now that you want people to know about? And I would think on the top of the list is whether or not, what kind of deal we're looking at about trying to keep the government open, but at the same time, Senate Democrats have been talking about taking out of that spending package money, additional money for ICE. Do we have a deal, do you know, at this point? Or
I think you have a tentative deal. You have the outline of a deal. And my hunch is that there is a conventional interest here. Nobody wants a government shutdown. But you also want to be able to make your argument, which is part of putting together a governmental assessment. And I think in the instance here, it was clear, I predicted at the beginning of the week, that Trump wanted a solution, or at least something that avoided a shutdown. If you recall, in the House, we used procedure to separate DHS, or the Department of Homeland Security, from the omnibus legislation. The rest of it sailed, but we were able to voice our consternation, our objections to the manner in which ICE is apprehending innocent people in many instances who have done nothing to violate their own status. And many times they could be their citizens who have gone through the process. But we wanted to be able to make that statement, which again is, you draw contrasts in government. That's a big deal. And I thought that, actually I thought Chuck Schumer took the right posture. And that was, look, we're likely to vote for all the other pieces of legislation here as it relates to the appropriations process. But we want to be able to contrast your position in the majority with our position in the minority as it relates to the Department of Homeland Security. And I think they've succeeded in doing that. Now, that legislation then has to come back to the House of Representatives, likely on Monday night, when we're back on Monday morning. And I don't know the particulars of it. I think they might have more trouble passing it with Republicans than with Democrats. We've actually done a pretty good job, I think, in recent weeks of fracturing the Republican coalition. Their refusal to ask any questions of the administration, their refusal to suggest that there ought to be any restraint on the executive, has helped create this problem. So when Schumer begins his negotiation with the Senate, who do you negotiate with? Donald Trump.
Right.
It's not the way it's supposed to work.
No.
And my sense is that we will get some form of legislation here passed.
One of the things that I think most people are most concerned about is, of course, the extension for the ACA. Does that look like that's actually going to happen?
Mike, I've been saying it, and I think that a lot of times because of the speed and the pace of news and social media, there's not a lot of chance and opportunity for reflection. But I led the charge, as you know, on the Democratic side over the tax credits, because that was within the jurisdiction of the Ways and Means Committee. What surprised me was 17 Republicans voted with us in the House. And you know what that means? The ACA is not going to go away.
Right.
So eventually the Senate is going to come up with some sort of an accommodation on some extension of those tax credits. 3 Republicans on the Ways and Means Committee defied their own leadership and voted with us on extending those tax credits. I was looking at some statistical data a couple of days ago in West Virginia. a couple in West Virginia that was highlighted, their premium on a monthly basis is going to go from $200 a month to $2,400 a month.
Wow.
So these tax credits are really important, and there's enough, I think, of an interest here in seeing them through. And look at the sign up here in Massachusetts again. 99% of the people in Massachusetts now have health insurance. Every child has health insurance in Massachusetts. It's worked. And the other part of it, I think, that didn't get a lot of attention, once again, because of, I think, media coverage of conflict rather than the substance of a story. When Marino in Ohio, the new senator from Ohio, he went wobbly. And the reason he went wobbly is not because of his own profession. It was clear. When John Kasich was the governor of Ohio, a Republican, I knew him very well from the House, a very decent guy, he embraced the ACA. So in Ohio, you'd be taking it away now.
Right.
And I think that that's the reason that the ACA now, given that vote, is here to stay.
Is it heartening to you that there were 17 Republicans who in the House who said, "Wait a minute, let's do the right thing. Let's do the thing that will help our constituents." I've read some analysis, and it's like, well, is this an indication that the Speaker doesn't have his iron grip of ideology on his caucus? Do you think that there are Republicans who are now saying, "What the hell are we doing"?
Well, I think the closer you get to the midterm elections, it's going to be every man and every woman for themselves. I mean, that becomes about self-preservation. And the other interesting part of it, because I know you like the inside business as well, I think that a lot of Republicans, once they saw that it was going to pass, then they felt they didn't have to vote for it. Because it's going to pass.
Right.
But they can still keep the base of the Republican Party happy by not voting for it. So they don't get blamed for a stalemate.
But they get the benefits.
And they get the benefits.
Wow. Wow. Speaking of Speaker Johnson, I've got to ask you, and we've talked about him before, a lot of these issues have come up in the last, since New Year's, last month. His response always to the press is, "Oh, I don't know anything about that. Oh, I don't know about anything." And it just seems disingenuous to me that the Speaker of the House, who's supposedly so close to the President, doesn't have a grasp on some of these issues that are manifesting themselves.
1/3 of his constituents receive some form of the Affordable Care Act tax credits. 1/3 of his constituents receive health care through the Affordable Care Act. That is an extraordinary number. The other part of it is that the framers of our constitutional system, which we're now in the midst of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, they wanted a check on the executive. They wanted a restraint. And that's why they constructed two chambers of the legislative branch of government, the Congress, to do precisely that. In this instance, I thought about 2 months ago, when President Trump said that he was President of the United States and Speaker of the House. Let me ask you this. Do you think that Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, or Joe Biden would have dared to say that to Nancy Pelosi?
They would have been eviscerated.
That hour.
Yeah.
I mean, and she would have said, it had nothing to do with personalities. It's about a separation of powers.
Yeah, exactly. So we're watching on a daily basis what ICE is doing in Minneapolis and in other communities. What struck me is that in all of this discussion about immigrants, illegal, et cetera, I don't see anything, and I'm asking you to correct me basically, I don't see anyone in the House or Senate saying, well, wait a minute, we still haven't passed a decent immigration bill. We had one under the Biden administration that came out of a bipartisan committee, and Trump squashed it because he wanted immigration as a talking point during the election. But are there people in Congress now who are saying, we've got to take on this piece of the puzzle, which is our responsibility to come up with a modern revised immigration policy? Is anyone talking about that?
Well, I think that there are conversations behind the scenes because there's an acknowledgement that it has to be done eventually. If you remember, there was the framework of an agreement, and candidate Trump ordered Republicans not to vote for it or to
Right.
support it because he thought that he needed it as a campaign issue. So do you want the issue or do you want a solution?
Right.
I mean, that's part of the political dialogue for sure. But look how far away the Republican Party has moved from Ronald Reagan on the issue of immigration. Reagan took the position, as many Democratic presidents had taken, there needs to be a process. And by the way, the border needs to be enforced.
Right.
You cannot have 1 million people walking over that border. That was a terrible miscalculation. And Trump pounced on it. But what's troublesome now is that people who are showing up at a courthouse to regularize their status, just to report having a green card or to say that I'm in the midst of applying for citizenship and you're granted some latitude on that basis, they're being apprehended. That was not the intention of the legislation for ICE. It was to go after people who had committed serious felonies, hardcore criminals, pedophiles and others. Yeah, they should go. But that's not what's happening now. It's, again, it's innocents who in many instances, they're citizens.
Right.
And they're being apprehended.
It just seems to me that that's what you're just saying. This is the other side of this coin. You know, we see this ICE enforcement of things, and I'm really hoping that those private conversations evolve into a public conversation in Congress about what do we need to do? How do we go forward from this to make sure that things can be done lawfully?
Well, that's exactly the point. And I think that at the same time, when you look at research, development, where the Nobel Prize winners have recently come from, they've been people who want to be Americans.
Right.
I often say to my barber's from Italy, became a citizen. Shoeman from Portugal became a citizen. The late tailor that I had from Russia, he became a citizen. And they all went through a process.
Right.
And the other thing that I think that we should honor, they're Americans by choice.
Right.
They looked at options and said, I'll take America. That's what I want to be. And I hope we're not going to lose that focus as a child of, a grandchild of immigrants.
Yes. My fear, though, is that the whole ICE issue is part of a package of changed perceptions about our country.
No question.
When viewed from the outside. We're seeing all sorts of manifestations of this. Tourism from Canada, which is big, especially in Vermont and Maine, decimated. They're not coming down here. They don't want to give us money. They feel like we have betrayed them somehow, which we have. Then you're looking just this announcement that the EU came up with this big trade deal with India. It was a better trade deal than we have with India. And it was like, well, wait a minute. Why is the EU operating on its own? Because of the actions that we have taken as an administration.
Well, the other argument that's consistent with what you've just said is that you could apply the same issue to China and what they're doing in Central and South America, as well as across Africa.
Right.
I think that Trump has done something that's pretty remarkable. He's united the world against us. And the personal ridicule, the scorn, to say, for example, that British soldiers did not participate with honor in Iraq or Afghanistan, that is simply not true.
Or taking down the 44 flags at the American embassy in Copenhagen, denoting the Danish soldiers that had died.
And I look back at that, and you know, Denmark, they've been a great ally of ours. They've been a great friend. NATO has worked. I think there is a reasonable argument about them upping their defense posture, but that was a Democratic position, and it was called burden sharing. That was 20 years ago we were talking about that. And I think their failure to meet the 2% goal that had been prescribed for them was a mistake. But a lot of them now have decided, and I'm not sure it's a good idea in the long run for us, to go it alone. When Harry Truman embraced NATO, and every president since, Democrat and Republican, embraced NATO until right now, they were honoring one of the most important agreements in world history, and it succeeded in stopping Soviet aggression.
Right.
And now, President Trump has trouble deciding who attacked who between Russia and Ukraine. I think we should be able to agree on the following. Russia attacked Ukraine. And I look, and as we deliberate the future going forward, there are 500 million consumers in Europe. I hope we're not going to forfeit them
Me too.
to China.
Yeah. Speaking of presidents taking on titles that sort of amuse me and scare me, President Trump has called himself the acting president of Venezuela. And again, I know there's so much that goes on that doesn't get reported or gets buried. Is there concern in the House that there doesn't seem to be an actual plan of interaction between our country and Venezuela? I mean, after all of this business about, yes, we got Maduro, blah, 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 the same people are in charge of Venezuela. It's just, instead of the president, who's now sitting in a prison, they got the vice president.
And a bad guy, Maduro.
Yeah.
A really bad guy. But then when you pardon
The guy from Honduras. The president of
Honduras,
yeah.
tons of cocaine, you send a mixed signal. And I also think that, look, there's an argument that people need to understand always about, oftentimes you can be welcomed as a liberator, and then you're held to a different standard after
Right.
a while because you've become the occupier.
Right.
And then it's common for nationalistic purposes in many countries to look at the outside force and say, well, they might have come on here under that pretense, but look what's happened. And I think, again, in this case, I'm not sure what the plan is. When you look back at Iraq, which I voted against, and there weren't many of us that opposed the war in Iraq, and I got up and spoke against it, there was no plan for the aftermath.
Right.
There was the invasion, there was the celebration, there was the chest pounding,
Yep.
how successful this has been, and then the reality settled in. And I think if we're not careful in Venezuela, we're going to end up with the same circumstance.
Well, personally, my biggest fear is that we're going to be putting U.S. troops there to somehow shore up a government or to quote unquote clean up a government. And frankly, I just think that would be another Vietnam. It would be this a swamp that would be very difficult to get out of.
20 years ago, Venezuela was one of the most prosperous nations in the world, largely because of their ability to produce oil. And it was Maduro and Chavez who helped to destroy the economy of that country. But seizing Maduro and not figuring out what the follow-up or plan B would be makes no sense.
I saw something on
And by the way, it reminds me of another qualifier that you'd be well aware of. The invasion of Iraq, when reporters said to Vice President Cheney, how are you going to pay for this?
Yeah.
He said, oil. We'll be in and out of there in months, and oil is going to pay for it. Well, we're still not out of there. Coupled with the fact that oil never paid for it, and it cost us a lot of American kids.
Absolutely.
And oil not only did not pay for it, it's $1 trillion investment from the United States.
So I guess my follow-up question is that we had that well-publicized meeting in the White House of all of these CEOs of various American energy companies, petroleum companies. And it was clear that the president thought that these guys would leap on this opportunity to invest how many billions of dollars in retrofitting Venezuelan refinery facilities, getting that oil out of there, and none of them leapt. I haven't seen one story since then that said, yeah, us, Mr. President, we'll take that on.
Well, that's because America produces more oil than Venezuela does now.
Well, I also read that a lot of these companies look more toward interacting with Canada for Canadian oil and stuff like that. And so now, to me, it looks like this whole thing has been set adrift. There's no plan, as you mentioned.
Well, we all know that oil is traded as an international commodity in international markets. If tomorrow Venezuela were to begin production, it would add about 1% to international markets. It's going to take years to get that up to 3 or 4%. And largely it's because of the way the world changed in terms of producing these fuels. And I think that in Venezuela, it would add very little to international markets, so it's not going to pay for itself. And the fact that, I thought there was a very, once again, peculiar moment in one of the president's briefings when a reporter said to him, after a tanker had been seized, the reporter said, well, what are you going to do with all the oil in that tanker? He had not thought out the answer. And he said, well, I guess we'll keep it.
That blew me away.
I couldn't believe it.
Because it was, don't you have an end game for this? And I don't know if we're still seizing tankers at this point or what we're doing.
We're mounting them in border, and there is now, for all practical purposes, a quarantine, yes.
So they're just sitting there, basically.
Sitting there, and the president is talking about what's to be done with them. Marco Rubio testified in the last 24 hours about that before the Senate, but did not have a really good answer on it.
Wow. Wow. Okay. I need to ask you something that I know you and many other people explained, but I think we need to revisit it, and that's tariffs.
Yes.
I saw him the other day, the president, talking about new tariffs against China. It's going to be 100%. It's going to be 145%.
Yeah.
I have never lived through an administration where something like tariffs change week to week based on the whim of the president. And I know this is an issue for Congress because, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I thought Congress was in charge of these kinds of taxation.
Tariffs are a tax.
Right.
Congress
and you guys are in charge of that.
determines tax. I filed a brief in the case, as you know, the Ways and Means Democrats. We filed our supplement to the case that the Supreme Court is hearing. Went over to mark the hearing itself. I thought the questions were great. I thought that Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Gorsuch, they asked questions I would have asked. Where did this power come from, they asked to the Solicitor General, that you believe that the President of the United States gets to determine tax. So what the President has done, he's declaring these national emergencies. And that's the case that's in front of the Supreme Court. Does he have the emergency power to authorize a tax under the guise of a threat to American economic security? And the answer is no. We're hunching that the Supreme Court will decide 6-3 or 5-4 to abandon the president's position. He will then revert to another very narrow slice of law called Section 301, which he will also call, it's more limited in its application, but he will then argue that that is to be utilized on the purpose and pretense of national security. So back to the point you made, that's a really important one. We don't like the result of a presidential election in Brazil. They get 50% tariffs. He encourages Prime Minister Carney in Canada. He said, you want to go make a deal with China? Go make a deal with China. The next day he says, if you dare to make that deal, I'll impose 100% tariffs on China. I'm sorry, 100% tariffs on Canada for an agreement with China. It's the chaos. It's driving our allies away. And, we're projected to have pretty impressive economic growth over the next couple of years, largely because of AI. The investment in AI, you look at what some of these companies are about to spend on artificial intelligence. However, why would we push away allies like Canada, European Union? Why would we walk away from the opportunities that America would have in Africa, South America, Central America? And that's what he's doing. Well, tariffs are a tax.
It's very distressing because clearly this is affecting American businesses and the opportunity for American businesses to export product, et cetera, et cetera. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, ultimately, it's the customers, it's the American public who are paying for all of this.
Look at what's happened to the farmers in Iowa because of these tariffs. And then he decides, well, I'm just going to pay you out of the federal treasury.
Right.
In a sense, to buy you off because of the tariffs not working. And I think when you look back at it, the American farmer is the most productive on earth. We produce the best quality of goods and foods, but it's the tariffs and the chaotic application of the tariffs that are distorting economic reality. And the consumer is paying more, and the affordability issue is right in front of us because of it.
Do you think that the tariffs are contributing to our inflation?
They are, and I mean, the reward that Jay Powell has received from telling the truth is he's accused of almost being un-American because he won't do what the president says. I hope that Kevin Warsh's nomination will be thoroughly vetted. That was pretty sudden this morning. We knew it was coming, but most people thought it was next week. And I think in the case of Warsh, he needs to be asked about politicizing interest rates. He has in the past been a hawk on inflation. We're going to have a chance to wait and see. I think the distressing part about this is that Jay Powell, who did a pretty decent job, he's a Republican and a pretty good guy.
Wasn't he appointed by Trump?
He was appointed by Trump. And then, of course, he has to be ridiculed because of his disagreements with Trump. You don't need somebody at the Federal Reserve Board who's a precinct captain in any political party's efforts, including Democrats. You need somebody to look at the data, and my God, the Federal Reserve Board has extraordinary data, and the 12 regional Fed banks, they have extraordinary data. They call it as they see it based upon the facts that are in front of them, not the emotions of this president or any other president.
I want to end out with the story that came out with the attack on, I'm going to screw up her name, Representative Omar.
Oh,
Now, thank God,
Ilan Omar.
thank God this guy actually didn't expose her to something that really would have hurt her, because apparently it was apple cider vinegar in a syringe. But it leads to the question about political violence.
Yeah.
And Steve showed me a Washington Post editorial that was carried by the Springfield Republican talking about the increases in threats and nasty emails and physical stuff.
And social media anonymity.
Yep.
It encourages people that never have to expose themselves
Oh, well,
as to who they are.
well, yeah.
They foment this.
Yeah, well, you know, I did talk radio for 5 years, and the whole idea of talk radio was, I don't know who you are, so you're going to say whatever crap that anonymity gives you that protection. But
You mean there was really no such thing as a first-time caller?
first time, last time. But my question is, do you and your colleagues, is there an increased awareness of your safety
Yes.
at this time?
We've all had episodes, just about everybody, and it's now in the thousands. I think that the latest estimate is over 10,000 threats.
So you've had a career in Congress for a long time. You're running for re-election. Is this an era of renewed political violence? I mean, is this a one-off? Did you see it before?
I have not seen it before, and I also think that there's now a group out there, after what happened on January 6th, they think that this is permissible because
Right.
you'll get pardoned.
Right.
That was an attack on the Capitol. Armed people, a couple, by the way, now they want to sue the federal government because they think that the federal government violated their rights after they assaulted the Capitol.
Right.
And I think that the worrisome part about this is that there's a lot of them out there, and the internet allows them to find each other. And I think that's a worrisome prospect. You're much more mindful now of where you go, what you do, very careful about the crowd. And I also think that, look, words count. And I think the charged nature of the way we talk to each other in America and the irresponsible use of language to incite the crowd, and even in media, look, it's about eyeballs.
Oh, yeah.
You've got to keep people on edge if you want them to dial in. So that becomes more and more reckless conversation.
Sir, thank you much again for spending the time with us.
This is nice. I always enjoy it.
And folks, thank you for tuning in to another edition of Government Matters here on Focus Springfield.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.